everyone. Welcome back to this week's episode of the PETHS Alumni Network podcast. I'm your host, Nathan, and today we're joined by Vippy Chau. How are you doing?
Hi, Nathan. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time on this Friday night. We talked offline a little bit. You're just coming home from work, so we appreciate your time. But to give a bit of background on you, you graduated from PET in 2019. We've had a few other 2019 grads on here who also ended up at Ivey, like yourself. And you were involved in quite a few things in high school, which we touched on a little bit before. Create, yearbook council, you're on youth council outside of school, right?
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. And then at Western, you were on the Western Marketing Association, at Ivey, like I said. And then now you're working at PepsiCo in marketing, right? Hopefully I didn't miss anything there. But starting from the very beginning, do you have any standout memories from high school?
I would say that Create was a pretty big part of how I got started into wanting to do a lot during university, because Create was kind of like my first experience, especially I think it was in like grade 10 to 11, to take on a little bit more of a leadership role. And so that transitioned me into being interested into doing things for university. And so that was pretty significant for me in terms of developing my confidence, giving me something to even put on my resume for me to be considered at a university level for things like director positions or whatever. And so I thought that not only was it good for my resume, it was also a really fun time in general. So I made a lot of my lifelong friends, I would say, through that. And I still talk to Rahul, who is like my co-president at the time, and we're really good friends. Given we were good friends before then, but I think it really cemented that friendship because we fought through a lot of difficulties trying to get Create through some difficult periods at that time. So it was honestly a pretty good highlight of my high school experience. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you had like a very well-rounded kind of experience. I didn't mention you were also in band for 2 years, which a lot of guests talk about.
Don't bring up the fact that I dropped band after 2 years. Everyone usually does it for 4 years. I gave up halfway through actually. So I don't know if that's actually a proud moment.
You're a band member alumni, I guess, or something like that. Graduate of the band program, right?
Yeah, grade 10 band alumni. Thank you.
I like how you touched on the difficult times, right? Kind of bring people together. Like it's it's not good going through adversity in the moment, but those difficult times kind of bring people together and they show you who you are, right? And at the very beginning, you mentioned that you kind of like realized that you wanted to take on more of a leadership role, right? And you recognize that you need that for your application. Was it kind of something you learned like intrinsically, or was it something that someone told you and you felt pressure from like other people?
I think in my household growing up, it wasn't really known for like things like extracurriculars to be done. Like it was always important for us to have a part-time job or things like that, but it wasn't explicitly mentioned that like, oh, if you want to get into a good university, you need to do extracurriculars. Like we didn't really talk about that in my household. I don't know if it's because like like most parents of like PETS kids, like we were immigrants, and so I don't know if my parents actually knew that. And so I think I was just wanting to find ways for me to, I don't know, feel involved in the school community, because like high school is very different from elementary in the sense of like you don't have a set group of friends, like you don't have a set homeroom for you to always go back to, which is ironic given Ivey's structure. But high school I think was harder for me in that sense of like, hey, I don't know who I am yet. I don't know what I'm interested in. So my approach was just kind of to like throw myself at everything and see what stuck and what was interesting to me. And so that kind of translated to how I approached university as well. So for example, in high school, I heard about people going on exchange and I was like, I don't exactly know what exchange is at this point, but I know that I want to go abroad. That sounds really cool. I speak French, and so maybe I could go to Paris or something like that. And so for me, that was always my goal. And so when I got to university, I used the same mindset of like, hey, what can I get involved with that would give me the opportunity to do this? And so that's how I found an organization called Isaac, which I guess we could touch on a little bit as well. But that's kind of like the approach that I took in high school as well as university. And then finding leadership roles between that would also obviously end up in me getting the roles that I have currently today. But that wasn't ever something that was told to me. It was just more so born out of me trying to figure out who I was and what kind of people I wanted to surround myself with. And I found that extracurriculars were the best way to do that. So in a roundabout way to answer, no one explicitly told me that. I just kind of wanted to do it intrinsically.
Yeah, no, I think that's something that, not a lot of us kind of take into consideration. Like we're just like, okay, I need like a 99 in this class to get in,
Yep.
right? But a lot of universities, especially business ones, take into consideration like a wide range of things. But it's not only for your resume, but also you talked about the lifelong friendships and like the skills that you build will help you like even in your current position, like you mentioned, right? And you kind of alluded to the whole Ivy structure, which we'll touch on a little bit later. Both of us being, Ivy students and graduates. Things like that. So I really like how you touched on, the knowing about like exchange, right? That was something that you like you took it upon yourself to inform yourself so that you can make an informed decision when you went to university, right? Why business for you, right? We kind of, we haven't really touched on anything subject specific, but why business for you?
Unfortunately, it's not a very inspiring answer, is what I'm going to preface with. It was unfortunately because I had a teacher who I will not name in one of the 2 years that I was forced to take sciences, in which I thought was really detrimental to my overall perception of sciences. It's not as if I did poorly in those classes. Like I think science, if I think about it, could have been some of my higher marks too. But I just didn't like the way that it was taught to me. And so it made for a very difficult learning experience when I was pretty young. And so, my qualms about our educational system aside of having to make a decision at 16 about what you want to go into, like, I think when it came down to it, I knew that I could do something with a business degree that is kind of guaranteed across all sectors, across all industries. Obviously, besides research or anything like that. But I knew that business was an important foundational skill to have. And so I thought, hey, this seems to be pretty applicable, across many sorts of roles. And so I thought if I wanted to have the best opportunity for something that I was interested in, I didn't want to limit myself in that way. But what I will say is that if you are in grade 9 or 10 and you're thinking about whether or not to take sciences, I would actually highly recommend you stay in sciences. That is probably what's going to, increase the amount of opportunities that you could have later on. Because for me, if I wanted to go back to school and do like engineering, I would probably have to do like, I don't know, extra night school or something to get like my grade 11 chemistry marks or whatever, you know what I mean? So I think I chose business because I was trying to increase the amount of opportunities I had. But I think by limiting myself to not taking sciences in grade 11 and 12, that actually limited me. And so all that to say is like, I don't regret choosing business because I still agree with what I thought back then of like, it has given me a lot of opportunity to explore many different careers in many different fields and figure out which one I was actually really interested in through my university degree. And also all the extracurriculars I did. And then later on in life, if I do decide, hey, like marketing isn't for me, I think having a degree from Ivey and business in general will allow me that opportunity to continue expanding the kind of breadth that I want to experience.
Yeah, I think that's super like informative, right? Like the reason why I started this page is to help, students make that decision because like you mentioned, it's really difficult to make like, I'll call it like a lifelong decision when you're 16 years old, right? So I think that definitely helps like really like tuning into the classes that you do have. And like the teachers are super important. I don't think they get enough credit. But also like you said, in some cases, like maybe blame in some cases, but that's a whole other topic that I won't touch on. So you mentioned Ivey. Ivey is a great name, and I'm obviously sort of biased. But once you had it narrowed down to business, why Western's Ivey?
Yeah. Once again, for how much I was involved in school, and how well I did academically, I did not do a lot of research, to be fully honest, into which universities or which business schools would be best until like pretty late into the game. So I would say that like I've heard all like my friends talking about like, oh, which one is really hard to get into, which one is whatever. So like some of it does come from like a point of pride of like, hey, I wonder if I can get in. But then I did end up doing a lot of like research into like which schools have co-op, which schools have a high recruitment rate, or Ivey also produces like numbers like, hey, here's the average salary that an Ivey graduate comes up with, and here's the courses that you could take, and here's what you could learn, and here's how the program structure is different. And so for Ivey, they have like a 2+2 program, which essentially means for the first 2 years you can take anything you wanted. You could take music, you could take engineering, you could take law, like not law, sorry, like philosophy or whatever. Or you could stick with business and then take 2 years of the actual Ivey business program. I'm not going to drain it. I'm sure other people have talked about it at length. But I thought that was a pretty unique structure. The one downfall that I was really debating between was Ivey didn't have a co-op program. And so when I was looking at schools, I didn't know at that point I wanted to do marketing. And I will say that there are some schools in particular that are known for marketing. But I didn't know this until later on in my university life that maybe marketing is the way I want to go. And so given what I knew at that time, I knew Ivey was one of the best names. And so I didn't just kind of like pick just Ivey. Obviously, I applied to a lot of schools. I think I applied to Queen's, Ivey, Ottawa for giggles, quite honestly, because they have a French program. I applied to Schulich, and I did, I think, U of T, and then I did McGill, and I think those are the 6 that I picked. I think I went with Ivey finally because one, it's far enough from my parents that I could reasonably live off, like, away from home and it not be contentious, which I think, in my opinion, is very important for, someone going into their first year to really learn who they are away from, the watchful eye of their parents, especially if you have like helicopter parents or parents who might, love you very, very dearly and just want the best for you. And sometimes university is not that. And so being able to make those choices for yourself, I think, are really important to your own character. You learn, what your limits are and what your boundaries are, and you learn to set those for yourself, because you can't have someone, tell you all these things. You have to learn them. So that was one. And then 2, I would say that it is very prestigious. Like, I'm not going to shy away from that. Of like, not everyone gets in, and so that added to the appeal of like, hey, I know that if I get into this school and I want to go there, like, I will be surrounded by people who are very high achieving, who want to do similar things as what I do and value the same, sorts of careers that I do, and might, be able to open my mind up to different careers and things like that. And so once again, at that point, I had no idea what consulting was, and I was in for a treat when I learned what that was. And so all these different aspects helped contribute to me picking Ivey at the end of the day. And I was able to get over the lack of co-op, because I knew getting in would increase my chances of getting internships because of, unfortunately, like, just the name on my resume. And so I would say that those were 2 of the most important factors when I was picking. And then obviously the third would just be like the 2+2 program, giving the flexibility of like, hey, here are the various different programs that I could apply to and I could get in with, and then kind of explore as time goes on, if business is the right fit, or maybe what I took for undergrad would be. And I thought that flexibility was very, very important, and would also bring a lot of diversity into the classroom at a place like Ivey, where, other schools where you're just sticking with the same people doing business all the time, you won't be able to get this, like, the differences that someone in, a chemistry background might have, or like a health side background might have, and bring to the table. So I thought that was honestly a pretty big draw for me as well.
Yeah, you touched on, a few key factors, right? Quite a few of them. We talked
I'm
offline
a rambler,
about,
sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. We talked about, the engineers in the class might kind of look at something differently than someone who has like a music background or like a geography background, things like that. So that was one key, point for Ivey. But, the name you mentioned is a huge thing. But I guess we kind of share that similar story where we kind of just, went on our laptops and searched up, what's a good business school, and then you apply from there, right? And offline, we talked a little bit about how, even though we both took like the general business program our first 2 years, like, you kind of said, it might be a good opportunity to explore something else before going into business, right? Can you kind of like expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think because at that point, I'm going to be so honest, like, I didn't really understand what else I could apply to other than business, because I was like, hey, I want to go to business school. It makes sense for me to apply to a business undergrad, give me a head start for my last 2 years at Ivey. But I think my issue with that is that I would actually encourage people to explore other interests, because you will have the same foundations covered and you can catch up very easily for a business class. Like, you just learn the terms and you can all speak the same language. Like, it's cool. But your first 2 years are very unique, in which, like, if you wanted to explore a philosophy degree, do that. And so you'll have kind of like 2 chances to get it right. Like, even if it's not business, maybe it was the first thing that you studied in your first 2 years. Like, if it is philosophy, for example, or geography, whatever it might be, you could find if that passion is the way you want to go. versus something like a business degree, which you can fall back on, which is weird to say Ivy's your fallback. But yeah, so like a lot of people actually do end up finishing their first 2 years in their 5th year. So they'll do 2 years of, let's say, music, and then 2 years of Ivy, and then their 5th year, they'll finish out their year with music. And so you'll graduate as a dual degree. So that's a really, really interesting perk as well. And I think, once again, not only does it bring a lot of like different insights into the classroom for yourself, like you'll come with a new perception, or you'll come with a different experience that you can provide value to the other people around you in terms of like sharing and discussion topics. But you also, I think, like you get to have a different mindset, I would say, when it comes to things like recruiting. So for example, when you're recruiting with, let's say, marketing, for example, and you're able to bring different strengths to the table, I think that is very important. You're not only bringing to the workplace, like the same thing that you can bring to an Ivy classroom, but you're also bringing a different range of like internship opportunities as well. And so that limits you in no way to be able to explore something else. Like, do not be afraid that someone will come and be like, oh, you don't have a traditional like business background, so you're not going to get a job here. Like, I don't think that's the case. I think diversity should be something that's very encouraged, be it, you know, diversity of people or just diversity of your experiences, and not just have to follow the traditional path of like, you know, I did BMOS and then I did Ivy and then now I'm going to graduate and be a consultant or whatever. Like, don't be afraid to do something different, especially if it's something that you enjoy actively.
One thing that we haven't really touched on, which like kind of seems normal to us now, is the whole case method, right? You've kind of been alluding to, you know, that discussion that's enriched by the case method, right? Can you kind of tell us a little bit more about that system?
Yeah. So, okay, first of all, I'll tell you what the classroom system of Ivy looks like if other people haven't already. You basically get a homeroom class and you stay in that spot for the whole semester. So not only do you stay in your spot, everyone around you all has assigned seating. And so these are the people that are in your section, quote unquote. And so you will end up being very close to these people because the teachers are the ones that actually change classrooms every period. And so think of elementary school, it's a lot more like that, where you're just doing different subjects with the same people. It's not like high school where you can like pick and choose your electives and classes that might be different, you know, lunch periods, whatever. Like, no, you're all on the same schedule. And so it makes for a very unique experience, I would say, in which you're constantly with these people. And so that's a very unique trait to Ivy. I thought it was going to be like high school. It wasn't. It was very different. And honestly, I really enjoyed it because you do get to have a very deep bond with these people. And you really get to know them outside of the classroom as well, because all your schedules are synced up. And so you can, you know, celebrate after a big exam and things like that. So that's awesome. So that's the first part of it. The second part, to actually touch on your question of like, hey, what's the case study method about? It's pretty straightforward. It's kind of like trial by fire in the sense that you'll be given a problem to solve through like a story. And it could be in the form of accounting, it could be in the form of marketing, whatever you're learning, it's all the same. Where I'm going to use like a marketing example where you're given a case and you're like, hey, here's the problem that this business is facing. What would you recommend? How would we, you know, solve their targeting problem? Or how would we launch this new product? Whatever the question might be, you don't have the answers. Like, there's no textbook for you to read ahead of time for you to get ahead. Like, you just kind of have to like figure it out on your own. Come to class. The teacher will ask, hey, we all read the case. What do we think? And then they'll sometimes pick on you and be like, hey, you, what do you think? And then you'll have to be prepared and come up with an answer on the spot if you haven't already done your homework, which unfortunately a lot of people don't. You have to really be good at believing you're not going to do your homework. And then you just have to talk about it. And so at the end of the discussions is when the teacher will kind of be like probing for more, or kind of trying to lead you in the direction that they want to take you. But there will be answers at the end of the class, be like, hey, like, this is what we talked about. Here's how, you know, we would solve it using this framework. And so you'll learn the framework after you already, like, you know, went through all the trials of, you know, I don't know what a target market is. I don't know what sizing problem, like, you know what I mean? Like, you don't know these things until you try it. And they have a philosophy of like, hey, we think that people learn better after they try it once, fail, and then, you know, we'll bring them the framework that can help them for the next time. And so that's kind of the case study method. I don't know if it's changed since I've been there, but that's what I learned. And honestly, I enjoyed it. I had a really great time. And it's always really interesting to hear what people would say. There are a lot of people who unfortunately will just be like saying BS. And so you can kind of like notice who didn't do their homework. But there are a lot of like, wonderful insights that come out of that when it's done right. And sometimes the discussions do get very heated. And this is where I was talking about like, hey, if you have a different experience, like this is the perfect time to bring it up, right? Because like people might not have thought the same way you did if you're coming at it from your specific background, right? So I think that is where a lot of value is given to like a case method or discussion, rather than just doing, your multiple choice like questions and then like your teacher just like lecturing you the whole time. Like it's just different learning styles, and I thought I really enjoyed this one at least.
Yeah, you've done a super good job of pitching Ivey so far. Describing.
Oh no, I don't want to
like,
be framed as like drinking the Kool-Aid.
Oh no, it's really good to inform people about what they're getting themselves into, right? Like I know, like we talked about, just researching online is a lot different than like talking to someone who's actually like been through it, right? And you've done a good job of. I fully agree with everything you said so far about diversity, the case-based method, all that stuff, right? And a lot of people don't read the case, which is kind of funny. But
people are fighting for like the case fact questions, and the prof is like, okay, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And everyone who didn't do their homework raises their hand because that's the only thing they can talk about.
Yeah, especially like, as you get into your fourth year, senioritis kicks in, like, like for the last few weeks, there hasn't been as many, contributors, right? Because people just kind of tune it out, right? And you mentioned that kind of like culture, right? Like people generally want to help each other, but it can get kind of heated sometimes, right? And you talked about like your first 2 years were like multiple choice, lecture based. Was there like kind of a bigger adjustment for you going from high school to university, or from your first 2 years into Ivey?
This one's tricky because I have to caveat that I had COVID in my second year. So by the end of my first year, like, I think it was like March of my first year, we were kicked out of our dorms. We had to go back. And so I think experience was very different from, someone else who might be going in now. So my first year, I was living on the dorms. Like they're forced to be friends because people are like all dying to make friends. And then second year, it was COVID. And so I stayed at home. Like I subletted out my place in London, and I stayed in Markham, and everyone was online. No one could see each other. And that was like terrible for like how like my enjoyment of school and things like that. So I think I felt very defeated by that point, but I was so ready to be back in person for Ivey that I think just like me, my peers were all very, very eager to make friends. And so that transition was easy because everyone was just trying to find their place and be like, make friends. And Ivey also does a really good job of orienting you. So we have our own version of like softs and things like that called owls. And so owls are meant to help orient you. They do beach days. They do like section bonding, like all the good things that you can think about. Like I think in high school we did some sort of orientation as well, right? For the ninth graders. Shoot, what was it called?
Trudeau-mania.
Okay, yeah. I was one of the Trudeau-mania counselors, and I thought that was a really good experience. So I was really happy when they brought it back for first year, but it felt a lot more special at Ivey because it was so much more like tight knit, and you knew that these are the exact same people you're gonna like stay with because it's a lot smaller than like the 200 or something kids in ninth grade, right? Like you only have 75 people in your section that are gonna stay with you, but then obviously you have. I think now you guys have 10 sections. We used to have 8 when I was in it.
Oh yeah, it's 10 now. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is a still larger cohort in general, but the people that you will stick with for the rest of your year is a smaller group, and so that's a lot more intimate. And then I did end up also doing like owling when I was in HBA2 because I was like, that was so much fun. I'm gonna definitely do it. Like it's not something to necessarily like needed for your resume or anything like that. I don't think I even included it in mine, but it is something that really just bonds you to the people not only in your year, but also the year below you, because once again, Ivey is this tight-knit community. Everybody kind of knows everyone. So yeah, I thought that was a very fun transition compared to, first to second year, which was a rough transition. But then just to circle back and touch on how was it going from 12th grade to first year, I think I was always eager to get out of high school. Not to say I had a bad time or anything, but I just knew that like, we are very head down, like let's just grind out, 9th to 12th grade and, get your average up, what is it, like 95% now to be guaranteed like AEO acceptance. Like, I don't know, whatever it is. Like we were all very head down trying to focus on that part. That I don't know if we celebrated enough how much we're able to accomplish as like PET students, because I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, and I'm sure many people have echoed that as well. Because like once you get to first year, if you keep relatively the same habits, it's going to be okay. Like I think what people really fail to do is that in your first year, you have a lot of freedom that you've never felt before. And so people go overboard. Especially true for PET students who might be a little bit more sheltered than average, who might be, I don't know, a little bit more bookish than the average Canadian student. I don't know if I'm projecting here, but that's certainly my experience. And so in first year, as long as you kind of like figure out your boundaries early on of like, hey, I know it's time to party, but I also do have a quiz tomorrow that's due and I need to make sure I get that done. Like you can do both, but just make sure that you're understanding the consequences of going out on a Tuesday when you have like a Wednesday midterm, for example. So I would say the transition in, from first year was fine. COVID, not fine. Out of COVID into first HBA1, a lot better of a time. So very long-winded way to say like just stick to your boundaries, make sure you have fun, but you know, in first year it's time to learn like how to actually study and you know how to balance your friends with your fun and things like that.
Yeah, so you answered my next question, which is going to be, you know, what are some key, you know, learning points? But you know, you mentioned it there, you know, have fun. You know, in grade 12, I think, like you said, your head is down, that you kind of forget where you are, right? And it's like a process that you only really get to do once. And you know, I think we should enjoy it a little bit more, as weird as that sounds. When there's so much pressure on you. And you touched on, you know, Ivy is kind of like a cult in a way, right? Like they make you like take a pledge and like things like that, and like their values, they make you recite things like that. But you know, more specifically at Ivy, it seems like you found your passion in marketing, right? And you've been involved with Western marketing, you know, throughout your time at Western, right? How did you decide on marketing specifically?
Yeah, I would say that at most universities, they have something called a club week. And so that's where you can kind of figure out what you want to get involved with. I knew of reputations of certain business clubs before I got onto campus. I've heard about the reputation of certain business clubs in particular being, you know, very like
elitist.
Yes, but also just like try hard. And like I felt a little burnt out from high school. Like I was on TSAC, I was on Create, I was, you know, doing part-time jobs, I was whatever else I was on, like that took up a lot of, I think, energy from me. And so I didn't want to put myself in a situation where I'd have to always be fighting to get a spot or whatever. And so I wanted a club with culture first. And so that was my big thing. And so when I joined WMA, it was actually through, you know, an alumni above me who introduced me and Catherine Tang, who is one of my close friends, to Western Marketing Association. And then we started as like directors, which is like the entry level, just a step above, like just being a general member, because you get to still organize things. You can join different departments, whatever. So I joined the marketing branch of Western's Marketing Association. So that's responsible for, you know, making sure that we get members to show up to events, making sure we're communicating, you know, the benefits of whatever. So that's how I started on the marketing branch of Western's Marketing Association, which I thought was pretty cool. And then my next year, I really enjoyed the culture that I found. So I was like, yes, I picked right. Nice. So I was like, okay, I'm going to put more time into it, more effort, because I know it's going to go rewarded in the sense of like, I'm going to get friends out of this. I'm going to get cool opportunities, whether it's be from the people that I'm, you know, working with, or it's the people that we are bringing into these events and things like that. And so I became VP of marketing. And so that means that I was in charge of a bunch of people under me. And I will be the first to say, I had no idea what I was doing when I was leading this team. Like I didn't really have marketing experience at that point, because what we were doing was basically just like social media stuff. But I didn't have leadership experience in this way. Because I would say that when we were doing like Create back in high school, you were doing a lot of the work yourself. So you weren't necessarily really like leading others, because other people were on your same page and knew exactly what they had to get done because they were also on the council before. But now when I was in my second year, I was leading a bunch of first years who had no idea university was, no idea what Western Marketing Club was about. And so I had to kind of figure that out as I went. And so I don't think that I was a good leader in my first attempt at being vice president of marketing. So for all the people who were under me, I think they learned a lot too, because they knew what not to do for my next year. And so thankfully, people saw through my faults and still wanted me on the council. And so Kat and I, the girl I mentioned earlier, we both joined as presidents for WMA because we had all these experiences of failing and trying and failing and trying in our first 2 years, that we were able to bring this experience together, because WMA is a relatively new club on campus, or was at that point. We didn't have a lot of structure. We didn't have a lot of processes or events that we knew were long lasting and sustainable for many years to come. So the culture was the biggest building block in order to get there, because if you have culture, you have people who will want to stay for 4 years, right? The biggest issue of a club is when there's high turnover and you don't have people who will retain the knowledge to pass on to the next generation. Mm-hmm. And so when I started as president in my 3rd year, I was doing Ivey at the same time. And I was like, okay, whatever we do, like, we need to make sure that the culture is maintained, and if anything, like, improved, to make sure that we do have these like long-term prospects for people who will stay from 1st year all the way until their 4th year potentially. And I think we did a pretty good job of that. I think from my understanding now, like, there is a pretty good culture going on, from what I'm hearing of like my, I don't know what you call them, predecessors? No. Successors. Thank you. So yeah, so I think that was very important for me. So how I found WMA, to recap, is I found culture first. Mm-hmm. What is the kind of culture that I wanted to join? And then I built a community around that. And I built my like club career, if you want to call it that, like after that. Not to say that you can't explore other things in the meantime. Like I did do like Western Pre-Law Society. I did do Ivey Consulting, or I don't know if it's Western Consulting. I think it's one of them. Mm-hmm. But I did do those things in the meantime, but I knew that I wanted to focus most of my attention and energy onto something that I felt very passionate about. And I was like, hey, well, I kind of extrapolated at this point. I was like, if WMA is this cool, maybe this means that people in the marketing world in general are more cool. Mm-hmm. I was like, maybe this is the kind of way I wanted to go. And that's kind of like what nudged me in the right direction of like, I'm going to explore marketing. I'm going to see where this goes. The people that I'm meeting from these events seem really, really cool. And they have a lot of like really fun experiences to share. This feels right. And so I'm going to keep going. And so that's kind of what got me started into marketing. And the reasons why I chose WMA in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no.
Kind of a nice overview.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear, those leadership perspectives, right? And communication, right? Because those aren't necessarily things that like you directly study in school, but you really get like thrown into the fire when you're in like an extracurricular. And it's important for like all aspects of life, being a good leader, being a good communicator. And so as far as I know with marketing, right, it's a bit of qualitative, it's a bit of quantitative. You're using sociological, psychological principles with business, basically, right? Are those all things that are interesting to you? Like what are some things that have helped you be successful in marketing?
Yeah, I would say that the most underrated part, okay, so just to specify, what I currently do is CPG marketing. And so CPG stands for consumer packaged goods. And so for Pepsi, at least when as I think about my own company, we do things like salty snacks. We do things like beverages. So Gatorade, Pepsi, 7-Up, Bubbly, like whatever your brands might be, that is kind of what we do. And so when we think about what makes an important marketer, these are people that can understand data very, very well. And so not only can they, obviously know how to pull data, and this is from, database training or just, getting practice out of doing this through a platform called Nielsen or Essbase or whatever it might be. You have to know how to pull it. Then you need to know how to organize the data. You need to know how to read it, how to interpret it, and then also how to, extrapolate information from this and put it in a presentable format to convince other people and tell a story of like, this is what's happening. Here are the reasons why I believe it. And here's like, you can see for yourself that what I'm saying is true based on all this information. And so I think when people go into marketing is a very general term. They just kind of think, maybe I'll make a poster, or maybe I don't know, like go work with some influencers. Like yes, you do those things in marketing, but that is not the bread and butter of what we do. At least on like I would say the company side of things. Because there is also the agency side. Agency is what you think of when you typically think of like a creative. That is very different. These are people that produce the content that you tell them to. These are people that maybe also could give you some strategy insights or whatever. Like you hire these agencies to come up with creative concepts for you, but they can't do anything without your brand's like strategic approval or alignment without your engagement of them. And so for us working on the company side, like you have to make sure that everything that you do is based in the data. And so the way we think about it at Pepsi is like marketing is both a science and an art, and you need to work both those aspects together. Because yes, you can agree that, hey, that Gatorade asset, like the video or whatever, I feel like you can change this color here or move this one step over and move your logo, whatever. Like that is like the art side of things where there might not be a correct answer all the time. It's pretty personal, but there is also the data side of things where, hey, but I put that asset into consumer testing and here's the data that came back with it. Or it could be like, hey, like I thought this innovation tasted better, like, I don't know, Glacier Cherry, whatever it might be. I thought this tasted better. That's my personal opinion. But then when we go and test it, we know that this one outperformed this one by XYZ index, or it's outperforming in terms of shipment data. It's outperforming in terms of like consumer targeting or whatever it might be. Like there is both these aspects to it. And so you cannot lose sight of the science behind the marketing. And I don't know if people fully understand that, especially people first starting in marketing, because I obviously did not understand that. And I had to learn how to do these things. And without that, you cannot be successful in a career like marketing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's a big question for you. You talked about, you know, how you came to know like marketing through like the clubs basically, but a big part of this podcast so far has been talking about Ivey, right? Did Ivey prepare you well enough for this position, do you think?
I think what Ivey does teach you are very important soft skills. They do teach you a lot of, you know, how to present, how to think on the spot, how to be put into difficult situations and keep your cool. Like these are very important lessons for anybody to learn. And I would say it is applicable in any business setting, not unique to marketing. I would say that what Ivey does prepare you in terms of hard skills is how to use Excel. And you'll be surprised, unfortunately, how many people do not understand how to use Excel and not use it like well. So like being able to do like, I don't know, a pivot table or whatever it might be are important skills, especially in such a data-driven environment like marketing. Like, for example, if you're just like at a call center, I don't know, making phone calls, like you don't need these skills necessarily to perform well. You just need to be convincing over the phone, right? And so that's a completely different conversation. But for marketing in particular, like you need to be well-rounded because as a brand marketer, you need to be able to kind of think of yourself like a GM. That is kind of the way that CPG world likes to think about brand marketers. You are the stewards of your brand. And so you are responsible for your cross-functional teams as well. So that includes supply chain, that includes operations, that includes like finance. We cannot pitch any innovation without finance being aligned with our P&Ls. We have to make, you know, certain margins or whatever. And so you need to be able to understand that and then communicate with your cross-functional partners effectively. And obviously that applies to things like supply chain, operations, regulatory, legal, whatever. And so I would say that Ivey does give you the kind of breadth that you're looking for because they force you into accounting class early on. They force you into finance. They force you into operations. They force you into strategy, into marketing, into everything that you might need to touch as a GM. And so I think because of that, that helps you think in the way that you need to be a strong like brand marketer, for example. Right. And so I would say that although there is a big focus at Kids at Ivey to do consulting or tech or finance, Ivey name still means something in the marketing world. And so it does help you with recruiting as well. It does help you in the soft skills, like I mentioned earlier, when you are recruiting, when you're going through the processes. And Ivey also, I think, is the reason why I got my internship in the first place, which is what hired me, because they have things like Ivey's Marketing Council. or Ivey's marketing council, and they run the Ivey's marketing conference or something like that.
Yeah.
and so attending or having access to attend those events allows you to get coffee chats. And then if you do well your coffee chats, which I assume you will because you're going to Ivey and because you're learning how to talk and how to ask questions and how to, be a relatively hireable person, does give you an advantage in the rest of the world. Because unfortunately, there are like hundreds and hundreds of applications that go through a portal. And sometimes having the Ivey name does help, but it is also the connections that you can make through Ivey, through these recruiting events. And then long term, after we think about recruiting, it is about having the skills to think from a broad organizational level, not just within your specific function.
Yeah, I think you knocked it out of the park with all the Ivey pros, a few cons that we touched on. We kind of just glossed over the cons that
we all know the cons of Ivey. I don't need to.
Yeah, we don't need to say them. Yeah, no, we don't need to say them. But I really resonated with the idea of you being kind of like a stewardess of the brand, right? And protecting the brand, working with cross-functional teams. But like I'm assuming that's something that you want to continue doing, right, in the future, right? So second last question for you. Do you have any like aspirations, whether it be in the line of work that you're doing, or maybe education-wise, traveling, volunteering, personal goals, anything like that?
Okay, well, personal goals are always my most important goals, is what I will say. And marketing, what I will say about marketing, gives you a very good chance to like excel in your personal life as well. Not to say that there aren't busy seasons. Like back in January was bad. But the rest of the time, it is your pretty typical like 9 to 6 or something along those lines. And so my personal goals are important to me, and they are always what's going to be number one. And so for me, that's traveling, that's making sure I can hike cool mountains, or I can, summit a volcano, or whatever it might be. Like those are always going to be what I'm thinking about long term. And so this year I'm hoping to do Patagonia. And so we'll see if that pans out. It's very difficult to book. So I'm fighting for my life trying to book these things.
Very cool.
Yeah. So that's my personal stuff. I would say that for my career, which is also very important to me, because you spend a lot of time in the office with these people who have to be your friends, or else you're going to be miserable. And so I think I was correct, just to fully finish the circle of like, I think I was correct in finding a good culture in marketing. Like this is what excites me. Marketing is what I think gets me out of bed every single day, because if I wasn't excited, I would not be here. It's very difficult if you're not passionate about what you're doing. So you don't have to get it right on the first one, but it is cool if you get it, somewhere within the ballpark by following your interests. And so for me, at Pepsi, at least, there's a few different types of marketing that you can do. I'm currently on shopper marketing, and I think my next role, I would like to probably be within like a brand role in particular. There are a few ones that I'm thinking of. I won't necessarily say them here, but I am excited to see where I go next with my career. And I think Pepsi and CPGs in general are a very good place to start, especially if you start with a larger name on your resume, because that kind of opens doors, not just within the same organization, because it's a global brand, a lot of international opportunities, but also externally, if that's something that you're interested in as well, because you kind of get the training that's very standardized and very well respected in the industry, and then it's very easy to leverage that when you do want to go elsewhere for other opportunities. But yeah, I would say I'm very excited to see where things go. I think I'm off to a pretty strong start. But
yeah, very cool. Awesome to hear. And like you said, Ivey can be very consulting and finance based. So what I've been told, at least by some professors, especially marketing professors, is if you apply to marketing, for example, like you stand out just naturally, right? Because there's less numbers, I guess. But they also know, like you said, that you have these skills, those cross-functional skills, things like that, right? And so final question for you, if you could nominate another PET grad to be on the podcast, who would it be?
I would nominate my close friend, Ina. Ina is currently at Western doing her master's. She's just about done, and she's studying some very cool things. I believe that she's going to cure diabetes, but I don't know. That's just me with my non-science background talking. But I would say that if you're looking for an interesting chat about curing diabetes, like I would go to my friend Dina.
Very cool. Yeah, I've said multiple times on this podcast that business kids, don't really quite understand a lot of things, which is
I'll echo that.
yeah,
True.
which is pretty true. And you've talked a lot about the pros of Ivey, right? A lot of good stuff coming out of Ivey, and I always wanted to have an episode like this talking about Ivey because for example, I didn't have any idea firsthand what it was really like going to Ivey. But yeah, there's pros and cons, like you mentioned, mostly pros though, I will say. A lot of pros, what it is to go into marketing, how you can lead by example and implement a culture that you really enjoy. You mentioned that trial by fire idea, kind of being thrown in, just figuring things out. Let's see what else. The cross-functional idea, the data-driven nature of marketing. I think that's something especially important these days. Yeah, it's been awesome to hear that you're doing well in your current position. You found your passion in marketing. Thank you so much for your time and insights. Thank you everyone so much for watching, and we'll see everyone next week. Peace out.